Right then. Cool, I've got sun in my eyes. Really strange day today. It's been raining all day. We've had monsoon-like weather. And now look at it. Anyway, more importantly, we've got another car here. This is fresh in. It's another early car. 1998. Carrera 2, coupe, manual gearbox. Finished in the lovely Zenith Blue, which we always go for when they come up. Non-sunroof car, again, very fond of that. Lovely clean looking roofline there. Let me spin this camera around and have a better look into the spec. So this car has got the very sought after MO30 Sport suspension spec with it, which drops the car by 10mm, giving it that slightly more sporty stance, as well as giving it that slightly more sporty handling feel. Now those wheels in the car, they're not actually the originals. They are the wheels from the bog standard facelifted 996, and they're 17 inches. And do you know what? I actually think they look really well. Let me know in the comment section what people think of those, if they'd leave them on or not, but I'm going to leave them on. Now usually I'm an advocate for a 911 being exactly as it came out the factory. So usually I'd like the original wheels that came with the car, that were spec with the car, to go back on that, but I think they look really well, and there was a reason the previous owner put those on. He was a Porsche enthusiast, and I'll go into the reasons later in the video. He owned the car, by the way, for 11 years and covered 26,000 miles during those 11 years and has done loads of work to it, but we're not going to go into that yet. We'll do that later. I don't want to repeat myself. Inside the car, we've got a graphite grey interior, which I always think looks nice alongside the Zenith Blue exterior. We've got the 3-prong steering wheel. We've got the trip computer for the MPG, etc. We've got Techquipment aluminium embodied handbrake. We've got the sound package, so we've got the extra speakers in the doors. And we've got the Techquipment enlarged and chrome tailpipe tips, which I always think looks really nice. So there we are. We won't go over the mechanical condition now. I don't want to repeat myself. We'll do that when it gets up on the ramp. I've got the early Zenith Blue C2 on the ramp. What we're going to do is get it up in the air, have a look around, and just demonstrate why it's a really well sorted, mechanically speaking, 996. So let's start in our favourite area, and an area that seems to get neglected on most of these cars. As you can see, he's done the front top mounts. There's absolutely no squeaks over bumps. It sounds like it's coming from the top of the dashboard, which is the telltale sign for the top mounts being worn out. The bump stops themselves are in good condition, not perished or split. So he's done those fairly recently. As you can see, the shock absorbers are Bilstein upgraded units. We'll have a look at that when the car's up in the air. The brake discs and pads on the front are pretty much new. There's absolutely no lip on those whatsoever, and the brake pads have got loads of life. Around the front, he's done the air conditioning condensers and the radiators. And then he's put these mesh grills in the front to protect them. He probably didn't fancy doing the job again. Now, I'm not usually very keen of these grills in the front, but they're the proper ones, Dun Sport. And they're finished in satin black, so they don't look too outrageous. So we'll be leaving those on. If we go around to the back, the rear brake discs and pads aren't as new, but look, they've not done many miles at all either. There's not much of a lip on those. They need a bit of a drive. It hasn't been driven since the car's been washed. Hence that surface corrosion from the iron coming out the discs. Let's get the car up in the air and have a look underneath. Absorbers have been done. Uprated Bilstein shocks all round. This car came from factory with the MO30 Sport suspension. There you go, look, you can see they don't look particularly new, but he's had the car 26,000 miles in total, so they won't have suffered much wear whatsoever. There you go, there's the Bilstein label on them. If we go back to the front, same story here. They don't look particularly new, but he's had both arms replaced on the front, the trailing arms and the control arms. The drop links have been done too, both corners. If we go to the back of the car, he's actually done all 4 arms on the rear of both corners. So look, 1, 2, 3, 4. He's also done the drop links on both sides. So the suspension has pretty much had a total refresh on this car. which is good to see. What I have just noticed, which I didn't notice before, because there wasn't an invoice in the paperwork, this one must have gone missing, stainless steel exhaust manifolds, which is a nice job to have done. So all the flanges, which are usually pretty crusty by now, are in good condition. He's also clearly done the coil pack heat shields at some point, because we know what they look like if they haven't been done, and we end up replacing them. He's also done the coil packs behind them. The spark plugs were done recently, and it was serviced only a handful of miles ago. The tyres, got Michelin N-rated Pilot Sports all round. The rears have got about 4mm. They've suffered a bit more than the fronts, as they always do. And the fronts have got about 7mm actually, they're nearly new. So yeah, there we go. I really like this car because we haven't got much work to do. There's a couple of little odds and sods to do, but he's covered most bases. So I've just lowered the car down to have one final inspection under the bonnet, under the engine lid, and so forth. And there's a couple of findings I forgot to show with you. So if we lift the bonnet up, look at that. Those bonnet dampers have been replaced. Just little touches like that let you know that owner really cared about the car. That was obviously annoying him, and he cared enough to look into it and get some bonnet struts, which not many people seem to bother with. The back's the same, look. That's clearly new. It's had brand new engine mounts put on. They've not been put on many miles ago at all. And the giveaway to that is, as we've spoken about before, that exhaust tip is nice and close to the rear bumper. If those mounts were very old, the engine would actually be sagging down, and that exhaust tip would be another, I don't know, another inch down, potentially. He's also had a cool running thermostat put on the car, so it's running 10 degrees cooler than standard, as you've seen us do to one of the cars in the previous videos. Another little job he's done is the ignition switch. So the ignition switch on these cars can become worn, and then it just goes past the point where it should go to. It goes a little bit too far, and then things like your headlights and your climate control won't work. So you have to bring it back if it's worn to the right position. So yeah, anyway, he's done that. He's also had some brake lines done on the car. I should have shown you that while we were underneath. And what I have forgot to mention, significantly, it's had the clutch, flywheel and rear main seal done. So there we are. I'm really fond of this car, because for a change, we don't have to do a load of work to it. The chap before has already taken care of it all. A couple of little things that I've already mentioned, I'll show you again. The sun visor is missing its little flap for the beauty mirror, so I've ordered a sun visor to replace that one. The fuel cap that we've talked about in previous videos is missing its little rubber string that holds it to the cap. So at the moment you have to put it up here or somewhere. There we go. And the number plate bracket, it hasn't got one, so we'll put one of those on. Well, there you go, it doesn't even need to be on the ramp. Those little bits and pieces can be done on the floor, so beautiful. Get those bits done and then we'll go for a little drive in it. So I've got the car down off the ramp, and I was about to put it back away, and I thought, do you know what, we don't need to wait for those trivial little bits and pieces, the fuel cap and the beauty mirror inside, to be fixed before taking it out for a spin, because they're not going to alter the way it drives. So I've got the camera in the car. We'll go out for a drive and we'll discuss the differences between this and the facelift. So differences between the pre-facelift car like this and the facelift car like the black one you saw earlier in the video. Let's start with the interior. So as we've spoken about before in these videos, the rule of thumb is the later cars, they come with better spec, and by better I mean more optional equipment. That might not mean better to some people. People might prefer the more basic spec in these cars, but as a rule of thumb you get more optional equipment in the later cars. This car kind of breaks that rule of thumb a little bit, because we've got some optional equipment. For example, the 3-prong steering wheel you see here, this doesn't come as standard in the pre-facelift car. You often get the squarer steering wheel that's come from kind of the older 993, 964 design, but this one's got it. This would have been spec'd. However, on the facelift car, this wheel comes as standard. Other bits and pieces, you don't have a cup holder in this car. What you would have got with this car from factory is 2 little plastic foldy cup holders that you insert into these little holes in the air vents on both sides. The air vents get broken, the foldy cup holders get broken and they're no good. So on the facelift car, they put a cup holder here beneath the air vent, you push in, out comes two air vents, two cup holders. Very, very useful. So in the middle of 1999, they made a few little changes to the 996. So that wasn't the crossover when it went from pre-facelift to facelift, but there were a few changes happen. One, the middle of 1999 cars, like this car we're in right now, had a cable throttle, which has become quite fashionable recently, and we'll explain that later. But it changed to an electronic throttle. So of course all the facelift cars have got the electronic throttle, and the very early pre-facelift cars have got the cable throttle like this car. Other little bits, at the same time, middle of 1999, they changed the latches for the bonnet and the engine lids from a mechanical handle like this, that's on a cable, to again an electric switch. Lastly, a car like this could either have no traction control whatsoever, or it could just have TC, traction control, on a little button here. However, middle of 1999, again, you could either have no traction control whatsoever, or they introduced PSM, Porsche Stability Management. Just a little bit more complicated version of traction control, essentially. So yeah, there are three changes that happened in the middle of 1999, and obviously applies to all the facelift cars. So another difference between the two. Another change that happened midway through 1999, or was meant to happen midway through 1999, was they changed from a dual row IMS bearing, as we've spoken about before on the channel, to a single row IMS bearing that isn't as strong. Now, although this was meant to happen midway through 1999, I've actually seen kind of 2000 reg and even 2001 reg pre-facelift cars with the dual row bearing, and I've seen early 1999 cars with the single row bearing. So Porsche there wasn't an exact day or an exact build number where they were like, right, from there onwards they're going to have the single row bearing. It seemed to be whatever was left in the factory at the time they used for a little while. But if you get a facelift car, you can be sure you will have the single row IMS bearing, and if you get a very early pre-facelift car, you'll have the dual row IMS bearing. So if we talk about the external aesthetics of the two cars and the differences they made to the facelift car, most notably they changed the headlight shape. So although it retains that non-circular headlight, they did change it slightly, and the reason for that was 911 owners were complaining that the front end of the car didn't look any different to a Boxster. So to distance it away from the look of the Boxster, they altered the shape of the headlight slightly. They also changed the front and the rear bumper ever so slightly. Of course, they changed the wheels for the facelift car, so you're offered different wheels. For example, the wheels on this car are actually from the facelift car, as we said earlier in the video. These are the bog standard Carrera facelift alloy wheels. So the most important bit then, the difference between how they both drive. And we spoke about it briefly before, but it's a bit noisier in here. There's less sound deadening, and it just makes it a bit less refined being in the early pre-facelift car. Handling wise, they feel exactly the same. The steering's got the same weightage, and they corner the same. We've got quite a good comparison there actually. Both cars have got the MO30 Sport chassis, albeit the other car was lowered ever so slightly. The brakes on both cars, as we said, is the same. The clutch and the gearbox feel the same. It is a different part number on the clutch. So when you replace these, you do have to order a different 996 part number, but the weight to them and the bite to them, they feel exactly the same. Now the engine, we spoke about it before. I've got less torque in this car, so when I pull off a roundabouts like I'm doing at the moment, you do notice it's more helpful if you're in a lower gear. But the actual peak power doesn't make an awful lot of difference. I'm 20 horsepower down in this car compared to the facelift car. But you've really got to jump from one car straight into the other to really notice that difference at the top end of the rev range, like now. But it makes this car feel like a more revvy engine. It makes the engine feel like it's more revvy. It makes the power band more lineal. And do you know what? It's actually quite nice because it encourages you to really get it up in the rev range. You can't be lazy with it if you want to drive it quickly. You have to make sure you're in the right gear at the right time, like I'm not now. Now we've pretty much covered all bases of these cars, I think, and the differences, but the last thing I want to touch on is the prices, the current prices of both cars. Now when we started this business, we've been going about 6 years now, there used to be a real difference in price between these earlier cars, the pre-facelift cars, and the facelift cars. The facelift cars were the ones that used to command the premium, being the newer car. But as they've both got older, the pre-facelift cars have been appreciating more in value. They've both been appreciating in value, particularly a nice manual coupe. Tiptronic convertibles haven't appreciated as much. But the pre-facelift cars caught up. So if the values were here and here, they've kind of both gone up, but they've now leveled out. By leveled out, I mean the two prices are the same. So if you went for one of these cars, pre-facelift, with 100,000 miles, 5 owners, in nice condition, full service history, and then you went for the likewise car in a facelift car, the prices will probably be the same. There's no variance in the prices now. So what I did want to touch upon briefly is the cable throttle issue. Now, like I said earlier, midway through 1999, they changed from a cable throttle to an electronic throttle. And nowadays it's becoming fashionable to have the early cable throttled car. Now, I think this issue is overhyped. I don't actually think it's any better. I guess it's kind of a subjective thing if you prefer the feel of the cable throttle, but I can rev match an electronic throttle just as easily on the 996 as I can the cable throttle one. I think they're just as good. And I think it's overhyped and becoming trendy for not much reason, but you know, that's my personal opinion and people will disagree with that. Okay, so just to move away from the comparison for a bit between the facelift and the pre-facelift, I feel like I said those words about 1 million times in this video, and talk about this car specifically. So as I said earlier in the video, the chap that had this car, he did 11 years, he did 26,000 miles during that time, and he was a real enthusiast. As you've seen underneath the car when it was on the ramp, it's had loads of work done to it, and basically I think he's wanted to make kind of just a refreshed 996 and a slightly improved one. So we spoke about the wheels before, for example. Actually, we'll start with the suspension. So he's refreshed all the suspension to make it nice and tight. It had MO30 sports suspension already on the car, which means a stiffer anti-roll bar, stiffer shock absorbers, and slightly lower suspension springs, 10mm lower. And what he's done, he's renewed the shock absorbers with slightly uprated Bilstein shock absorbers, so they're slightly stiffer even than the MO30 sports shock absorbers that were already on there. Now, you think that's going to make a harsher ride, isn't it? Naturally. So what he's done to compensate that is he's put the 17-inch alloy wheels on there, which of course have more of a tyre wall on them, so the tyres are more forgiving, so it's compensated for the stiffer shock absorbers, but he's still gaining that benefit of the stiffer shock absorbers. A sharper handling car. What those wheels also do is they're lighter than the 18-inch wheels, and the less unsprung weight, the better. The car will just handle better with less unsprung weight. So there you go, there's two benefits he's done there. He's made, I think he's just tried to make a better handling, improved 911. So as I was saying with the black facelift car, I like those subtle modifications that kind of improve the drive of the car without compensating it at all. So yeah, there we go. Talking about the car overall, all that refresh work he's done has made it feel lovely and tight. It really is. It's 123,000 miles, this car, but of course all those components have done at max 26,000 miles, so it feels really tight and it's really a nice thing to drive. That's me done for the evening. I feel like I've been out filming for hours. First it was sunny, then it started pouring down with rain, then it got overcast and windy, and now it's getting dark. One thing I forgot to mention with this car was the bodywork. The bodywork was fantastic to start with. So it hasn't been to the body shop. Look at that colour under that daylight. It's going really kind of purpley. Yeah, the bodywork was really good to start with. So all it's had is a detail done by Joe. He's done a really good job. Although he's going to need to clean it again now. It's just got filthy on those wet roads. I'm sorry if this video has been a bit waffly and a bit long. Let me know if I should make them a bit shorter. I'd like to know people's thoughts on the cars. Which do people prefer? The pre-facelift or the facelift from earlier in the video? And do you like the little modifications like I do? The wheels and the suspension? Or would you have put them back to factory? Anyway, it's getting late now. I'm going to go and put the car away and end the video here. Cheers for watching.